Okay, this is weird. At the beginning of June, I had a full script ready where I was going to talk about why I was worried about the way Elden Ring was going to turn out. However, E3 was just around the corner, so I decided to wait for E3 to pass, just to see if Elden Ring would appear there. We saw stuff for a new Metroid game called Metroid Dread, a new Mario plus Rabbids game, and a reveal for a game for Avatar. But what I and many other people were looking forwards to was some sort of update about the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, or known on the internet as Breath of the Wild 2. And we did! We also got a trailer for Elden Ring! The trailer for Elden Ring was awesome, and washed away all of my concerns, and filled me with excitement. However, the opposite somehow happened with the new trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. But how is that even possible? Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games of all time, so I, like everyone else, was fixated with the prospect of a sequel, but somehow that didn't happen. Somehow, every time I see this new trailer that was released, all I can feel is an inescapable dread that takes over my soul and makes me wish I had never seen it. Now, before you crucify me for saying anything bad about this game that hasn't even released yet, hear me out. I would at least like to explain myself. And I'm also curious if you feel the same way. Well, I better get started before I lose your attention. So, where to begin? Well, I guess the best place to start is with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Since the very beginning of Breath of the Wild's development, the developers were aiming to break free of older conventions in the Legend of Zelda series. This is probably because they were hot off the heels of Skyward Sword. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword was one of the most linear Zelda games ever created. Every item and tool was treated like a massive puzzle that could only be accessed one piece at a time. However, there was a lot of backlash after Skyward Sword came out, mostly because of that restrictive design, and also motion controls. Breath of the Wild changed all that. While it certainly took some elements of inspiration from previous Zelda games, including Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild aimed to give players the freedom that the series had been lacking since Wind Waker. With the help of Monolith Soft, they were able to create one of the most beautiful open worlds of all time. But it wasn't just beautiful. One of the main innovations that Breath of the Wild made for the Legend of Zelda series was a seamless open world. You see, in previous games, the areas were broken up into regions, and accessing each new region required players to go to specific entrances and exits to access a new area, typically with a very quick loading screen. However, Breath of the Wild changed all that, because for the first time in Zelda history, there were no set pathways that players needed to follow, and no obnoxious loading screens separating each area. Players could go wherever they wanted to, and to go on any adventure with very little interrupting the immersion players could feel while exploring, because it felt like you were in the untamed landscape of Hyrule. After Breath of the Wild was released, it was met with adoration from longtime fans and newcomers alike, and it wasn't long until a direct sequel was started. You see, at the end of the development for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, work on the DLC, or downloadable content, began, but the developers ran into an unexpected issue. They had way too many ideas for the DLC. With all these ideas on the development table, the developers decided that a bunch of these ideas would then make their way into Breath of the Wild 2. And that's how Breath of the Wild 2 started. And this start of a new game from DLC sounds promising. There are a bunch of games that started out development as DLC, but then the project expanded past its original scope, leading to its own game. Just take a look at Hollow Knight Silksong whenever that comes out. And sometimes, the developers will craft DLC that's better than the main game. So the development of this new title sounded very promising. Now then, people began to speculate about a possible Zelda project when Monolith Soft began hiring more employees in March of 2019. If you don't know, Monolith Soft are the developers who have made the Xenoblade Chronicles series. Monolith Soft also helped in the development of Breath of the Wild, as many of the Monolith Soft employees developed the topographical design in Breath of the Wild. Also, the hiring message had a giant Triforce on it, so everyone paid attention to it. Then, at E3 2019, it was officially confirmed that the development for the sequel to Breath of the Wild had begun, and there was nothing but silence until this E3. After 2 years, we have finally gotten a new trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, but still no title besides Breath of the Wild 2, and once I saw it, my heart dropped. As awesome as all this looks, the cool hand, the new floating areas, and the stone talus fortresses, it all feels the same as Breath of the Wild. To be fair, there are noticeable differences. The Bokoblins have had their horns elongated, and the Moblin horns have been replaced by these big bony bumps on their heads. Camps have been moved onto the tops of stone taluses. Link now has a magic hand that lets him reverse the kinetic energy of items and swim through solid rock. And there is a new area with massive floating rocks, autumn leaves that match the Akkala region, and cool ruins to explore. And while these things look cool, can you really say that they stand out that much from the main game? How much is a new hairdo going to change the strategies that players have developed for dealing with Bokoblins and Moblins since Breath of the Wild came out? The kinetic reversal and quantum tunneling abilities that come from Link's new hand could easily have just been runes on his standard Sheikah smartphone. And how many of you can say that the Stone Talus Fortress fight won't devolve into a standard Stone Talus fight after all the Bokoblins have been taken care of? Honestly, these just feel like add-ons to Breath of the Wild. These could have easily been added in as DLC, and to be fair, that's how this game started out. An overabundance of DLC ideas, and the developers decided to turn it into its own game. But the thing that bugs me the most out of the new content is this new sky area. Allow me to explain. The open world of Breath of the Wild is a massive part of why the first game was so good. It was seamlessly interconnected, with nothing stopping you from exploring it. If you saw a mountain, a valley, a jungle, or a village, there was nothing stopping you from just ditching your responsibilities and going to it. And the adventures you had along the way were fun and could easily distract you from your objective. It was a blast to say, I want to go there, and then making a beeline for that place. However, this new sky area is not that. It is nothing like the interconnected adventure that Hyrule possesses because it's a secluded group of islands in the sky. It reminds me of Eventide Island, one of the most despised areas in the base game. On Eventide Island, you reach what you will think will be a relaxing vacation, but this island is secluded from the rest of the map, and it likely took you around 5 minutes to fly here on your paraglider. Swimming is a questionable option, as you will likely drown as you attempt to reach the mainland, and using Cryonis to cross the watery chasm is a tedious nightmare. Also, all your stuff is stolen from you, and the only way to get it back is to beat the trial this one monk presents you. And only after doing that will you have a chance to get your stuff back. Or you can cross the ocean and then the monk says, "Oh, you don't like my trial? Well, here's your stuff back." Newer players hate this island, and for good reason. And there lies the problem with these floating islands. It will be like another Eventide, secluded from the rest of Hyrule. But this problem with the floating islands can be further exemplified by that one archipelago in the ocean. These islands jut out of the sea and are connected by wooden scaffolding, which are giving me Dark Souls Blighttown flashbacks. Once you fall off these islands into the cold ocean below, there is very little you can do to get back up. You will either have to brave the arduous task of climbing these cliffs, leading to you using all of your stamina recovery foods, or you will have to fast travel to the closest shrine and do the whole thing over again. Well, unless Revali's Gale has gotten a power boost that launches players 50 times higher in the air, that's pretty much what's going to be the case for this new sky area. Players are going to fall down to Hyrule with no other alternative than fast travel, which breaks the immersion of a grand adventure. Unless, of course, the developers go with the bottomless pit option, where falling off will boot you back to the spot you fell from. In which case, why didn't they just add this as DLC to the main game like they should have? Remember, one of the best parts of Breath of the Wild was the seamless world transitions. You didn't always have to face a loading screen when entering a new area, and the map was very well designed, making any voyage feel fun and adventurous. But judging by the footage of this area, This is just going to be a DLC area in its own pocket dimension. We don't even see this new area in the shot of the floating castle. It's kind of like the open sky area in Skyward Sword. While adventuring on the surface, there is only one way to ascend above the clouds: by running across the map to the closest bird statue, going through a menu, and then ascending to the clouds above to do whatever it is you want to do in the expansive, empty sky. To be clear, Skyward Sword isn't exactly a bad game, but it certainly is nothing compared to Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, players can go wherever they want, with nothing stopping them, but this is because of how interconnected it all feels. Having an open sky area like this, it would be like going back to the restrictive and linear feeling of Skyward Sword. And that sounds awful for a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And yet, there was more, but instead of making me worried, copy and pasting the map from Breath of the Wild pissed me off. Look closely at the trailer. There are sections of the footage where Link is exploring Hyrule. But tell me, what's the difference here? Their answer is, there is no difference, or at least not in the footage we've seen. The only real differences are that the Sheikah Towers are now missing, and Hyrule Castle is overcome with malice. Again, this is a big problem for Breath of the Wild 2. Fans of The Legend of Zelda have picked through this map region to region, exploring all the rivers and roads, the forests, the Zonai ruins, the mountains, discovering glitches in the overworld, and collecting all 900 Korok seeds. I'd be willing to bet that you know the map of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild better than you know your own neighborhood, or even the city you live in. And honestly, I don't blame you. This world is fantastically designed, starting with what might be one of the best introductory areas in the history of video games, leading into the vast expanses of Hyrule that are begging to be explored. And this here is the problem with copying the first map one for one. Everyone has already gone through this version of Hyrule before, meaning that overall, this will be the same experience as Breath of the Wild. Take this scene with the new Talus camp. If you look around at other things besides the new variation of Talus, you can see that Hyrule remains the exact same. In fact, I was able to pinpoint the exact location this shot was taken. It's in Hyrule Field, and it's at the base of Whistling Hill, right next to this one road. I didn't even have to look that long to find this place either. I just had to look in the background, see that Death Mountain, Lanayru region, Kakariko Village, and Twin Peaks were in the shot, and then after 5 minutes of riding around, I found it. It's scary! And if I could find this area, so can you. But this only exemplifies the problem that in Breath of the Wild 2, players will be playing the same adventure as before. Now I know what you're saying right now. It's something along the lines of, that's asking too much of the developers. They already have to deal with the 2 new enemies in the game and the new area. They don't have the manpower or resources to change the game that much. And while I hate to say it, that's incorrect. We've seen game developers create games in record time, including Nintendo games, and even in the Legend of Zelda series. Just take a look at Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and the region of Gormott. In the main game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Gormott was a fun forested area to explore. Then the DLC adventure came along, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna the Golden Country. This DLC takes place 500 years before the main game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and it revisits Gormott. But the developers were smart enough to change the layout of Gormott in this DLC adventure. They changed the geography in subtle ways, meaning players could explore Gormott one more time without any of the repetition of playing the main game. And if you want a different example of a developer making a different map for a sequel, you need look no further than the Legend of Zelda series. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time came out at the end of 1998. It was widely beloved and brought the Legend of Zelda series from 2D to 3D. But it didn't end there, because the same team then created another game in record time. They reused the character models and game engine from Ocarina of Time and created Majora's Mask, a game that is just as good as what came before it, and debatably even better than Ocarina of Time. So we have seen games that make different maps in incredibly short periods of time with the tools they have already made. There is no reason they couldn't change the map, and especially not if they have the help of that team of developers that Monolith Soft just recruited. And they don't even need to create a new map from scratch. They could just do what Xenoblade Chronicles 2 did, making small changes in the map in order to make the adventures stand out from the main game. Either that, or they're going to need to create some game-changing ways of traversing and exploring the world, like what they did in The Link Between Worlds. Now, to be fair, this probably isn't the final game we are seeing in this footage. After all, development of Breath of the Wild 2 wasn't officially in development until mid-2019, and then, well, 2020 happened, and we got struck by a global pandemic. The pandemic messed up a lot of stuff, including game developers, and we are only now starting to recover from the pandemic. So the footage we are seeing is likely a very early build that hasn't been given the proper treatment it needs. So if that is the case, they will likely be able to give this game the full attention it needs to be as great as Breath of the Wild is. When that happens, I will happily eat my words. Nope, that's not a throwaway joke. I will print out this script and eat it on camera. And it's completely possible that I will be wrong and will have to eat my words. Of course, we would need to reach some sort of subscriber goal before that, because why not? But until that time comes, I am still allowed to be worried. And I'm sure that I am not the only one who feels this way. How many of you want to buy a second game that is almost identical to the first game, with just a few gimmicks making them different? How many of you want to buy what is basically the first game with a few DLC ideas slapped on top, all sold to you at the price of a full game? Chances are your answer is no. And as I have said before, I really hope my concerns are unfounded. I hope by the time Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, these issues will have been dealt with, and this game will be as good as Breath of the Wild. And maybe we will have a name for this game besides just Breath of the Wild 2. In the meantime, please like, share, and especially subscribe if you want to see me eat this script when the game comes out. Unfortunately, I have no idea what that subscriber goal is, so for now, I'm just going to say 300 subscribers. Have a nice day, unless it's raining and you can't climb on your favorite landmarks, and bye. I'm going to hunt down as many Lynels and world bosses as I can in rapid succession. Don't question how I play this game.